A mega transport at a mining site. A huge steel frame needs to be moved. The perfect job for heavy haulage pro Randolf Peters.
The load sinks a bit here, so we'll put supports over there.
They'll be navigating a real obstacle course with a super tight squeeze under this hopper belt conveyor.
Günther, lower the chassis.
Another hazard, the power line's on the way.
If we don't turn off the power and it sparks, that's bad news.
Keeping a sharp eye on the transporter means walking backwards for kilometers at a time.
It's about 5 kilometers per hour. You get used to it.
Then there's tight corners and steep slopes to contend with. A precision operation for a load as big as this. The United Schlienhein coal mine, some 40 kilometers south of Leipzig in the German state of Saxony. Giant excavators are hard at work on 4 seams of lignite brown coal. Each turn of the bucket wheel scoops about 15 cubic meters, about 11 million tons a year in all. The lignite ends up here in the Lippendorf power plant. It generates enough electricity and district heating to supply about 60% of the households in the city of Leipzig. Huge hopper belt conveyors, stretching over many kilometers, bring the lignite to the plant. Hopper belt conveyors also shift the overburden, about 35 million tons of it a year, to the spreader. The strip pits are then refilled with rocks and soil. The hopper belt conveyors extend over nearly 38 kilometers. They're equipped with drive stations fitted with powerful electric motors. As the excavators chew their way through the terrain, additional hopper belt conveyors and drive stations have to be brought in. They'll be transported here from a decommissioned strip mine. This equipment has been out of operation for 30 years and has been partially dismantled, but soon it will be getting back to work. Randolf Peters is in charge of transporting the drive station.
Well, the problem is that the drive station is 49 meters long and almost 6 meters wide. The section of the mine we'll be driving through has some tight turns. And the road takes us up some hilly terrain. So it'll be a challenge.
Now it's time for the final convo with Andreas Zuron, who's in charge of dismantling and setting up the drive station.
Are the supports here yet? One is going to have to go over there. Oh, it's there. And over there, we'll need one to make it level.
We'll put it over there.
The route will take them under a hopper belt conveyor, so the 2 crawler tracks will have to go.
Up there, you can see where the beam was cut in order to separate the crawler tracks from the drive station. We'll rest it on the beam for transport. We want to lower the height of the drive station to give it a maximum clearance of 5 meters 20. This here is the support beam we've mounted for the job.
A flatbed truck is fetching the transport vehicles. There are 3 transport modules in all. 2 of them have a drive system. This module doesn't.
This module weighs 16 tons. It has to be clipped to the mount and unloaded. Usually that's pretty easy. One of the easier jobs.
But the exception proves the rule. Randolf Peters and Günther Lübke attach the chains. When they try to lift the module, there's a surprise in store. One of the axles is drooping.
There's no plug in it.
What? No plug?
Look.
The crane operator's not having it.
It's broken. You've brought a wreck.
It's not broken. Normally it wouldn't droop down like that because they put a connector in it, and they forgot to do that.
Not that it matters. Before the transporter gets underway, all the plugs that keep the axles raised will be removed. The next flatbed truck rolls in. The module it's carrying has an engine in front. It's an SPMT, a self-propelled modular transporter. Unloading this 21-ton vehicle isn't going to be easy.
We're going to have to pick the right points to attach it so that the vehicle will be reasonably level when we lift it. The front is heavier, the engine is 5 tons. We have to figure out where to attach the hooks to keep it level. If we use the regular points, it will tilt toward the 5-ton engine.
Moving the connectors is finicky work, and at nearly 35 degrees Celsius in the shade, it's a real slog.
Man, it's hot.
20 minutes later, the hold points are in position. The 2 heavy load experts can now attach the crane hook.
Don't scratch the paint, we'll dock your pay. This is hard work in the heat. All that stuff is pretty heavy. It's made of iron. And the heat really adds to the fun.
Time to hoist up the SPMT. It doesn't stay level. The rear lifts up, but the nose, the engine end, bumps against the loading surface. They've got to put it back down again, but Randolf Peters has a solution.
To unload this one, we're going to start the engine to lift the power pack 25 degrees. With that extra clearance, we'll be able to lift it with the crane and unload it.
Randolf wants to make sure the engine isn't damaged. Unloading was the easy part. The next stage will put the 2 heavy haulage experts to the test.
We're going to connect the 2 4-axle modules. The one with an engine, which we just unloaded, and the one without an engine. That setup will let us drive on public roadways with a 12-ton axle load.
The transport vehicles and the load will weigh 130 tons in all, which have to be distributed across 12 axles. The SPMT is steered by remote control.
The SPMT is a self-propelled modular transporter. We use them on mining sites because there's not enough room for a larger transporter. What's good about a vehicle like this is that each wheel can be controlled independently, and each axle can rotate 360 degrees. In a 4-axle module, 2 axles are powered by a hydraulic unit, which can also function as a brake. Their deck height can be hydraulically adjusted by about 40 centimeters, which helps keep it level on uneven ground, which you'll see quite a lot on terrain like this.
To join the 2 modules, they'll need to be perfectly flush. That means shifting back and forth until they're in position.
We're going to move the module with the engine to the engineless one. Try to get the loops in position and couple them with the pins. That will connect the 2 modules head to tail. The problem is that they're in position, but the loops aren't meshing. You can use the chassis edge as your guide. You want to look along the first edge to the second edge. At some point, you want it to form a straight line.
Günther Lübke has to make sure that the connecting loops sync up and stay perfectly straight.
Hang on, stop.
The hydraulic hoses in the front module have to be inserted into openings in the rear module. Now, Randolf Peters navigates the modules into position, a centimeter at a time.
Okay. Stop. Okay, continue. Good, good.
The openings in the loops need to match up perfectly. Otherwise, the connecting pins can't be inserted.
Yep. Yep.
I'm getting close.
Good. You in?
No.
Yes. Yep.
They did it. Now the tops of the two modules have to be connected in 6 spots.
This iron's hot and we're sitting on it. You're cooked from below and the sun cooks your head. These pins are heavy too.
But there's no time for a break. The schedule's too tight for that.
Now we'll connect these hydraulic hoses. The hydraulics are used to lift the modules, lower them, and for steering. This here is air. We've got to hook it all up. Then we can lift the chassis. That will help us connect the 2 big hoses in the middle which supply the engines. That's what we're going to do now, in this heat. Good stuff.
Once all the hydraulic and pneumatic connections are in place, Günter Lübke tightens the last screws. The SPMT is ready for action. Randolf Peters first moves the smaller single module to the loading zone. Transport machinery is his passion, and these vehicles are something special.
At some point, my boss realized that the company needed vehicles like this to stay competitive. We talked it over, and I was really interested in it. So I did some training, and here I am.
Training is one thing, experience is another.
You need a lot of practice, and there's always something new to learn. Every day and every job is different. Each load has a different weight. Every load has a different center of gravity. The terrain varies. The weather varies. Today's really hot, the next day it might be very cold, and that affects the hydraulics. When it rains, the traction is different. There's always something new to take into account.
A flatbed truck is parked along the route. Randolf Peters tries to navigate his way past it, but suddenly he's stuck. Reversing doesn't work either, despite the SPMT's 500 horsepower and 16 drive wheels. He hauls out some big rocks from between the wheels. They were acting like brake wedges.
What a drag. They didn't pack down the surface well enough. We'll go to another entrance.
With the rocks gone, the SPMT has enough traction to get through the gravel. At the other entrance, the ground is firm enough to give the transporter easy access. For the moment, Randolf Peters will park the single module at the loading zone. Günter Lübke is bringing the longer SPMT, the one with 2 modules. They don't want to get stuck again. Lesson learned. Günter Lübke heads straight for the second entrance, but they can't start loading the drive station quite yet. First, all the smaller parts dismantled from the drive station have to be moved. A specialist company has removed everything from the drive station that would make the load higher than 5 meters 20. The heavy motors that power the bridge conveyors are also hauled onto trucks for transport to the new location. Günter Lübke takes the opportunity to inspect one of the obstacles on the way. A bridge conveyor they'll have to pass under. This is what determined the maximum clearance of 5 meters 20. This curve is also too tight for the 50-meter-long drive station to navigate.
We won't fit through this tight curve, so we're going to lay out steel plates. We'll drive up here and then take the sharp turn. We'll lay out more plates where the tarmac ends to take that sharp turn there. We're too long to go that way and too high to get through over there. We have to stick as close as possible to this pylon.
Team member Sigmar Böttcher is laying out the 200-kilo steel plates beneath the conveyor bridge.
This ground here hasn't been packed down, it's just coal dust and dirt, so we just sink down into it. The plates will allow us to drive this way without sinking.
That angle's okay, right?
The angle's fine, it'll work. Let's lay another 2 plates, over there.
We'll go up to that corner and then give it 2 or 3 meters.
Yeah, right.
We'll have to lay another one over there. I'll have to move one over there later.
No, we'll start here.
Right.
An electromagnet helps lay the plates. It's quick, but a bit on the tricky side.
You have to make sure that it's pretty near the center. Then set it down. Turn the lever. Now it's activated. Then stand back before it's lifted. The crane is high, so it will swing a bit. You do have to be a bit careful. You don't want to jerk it up or move it too abruptly. Because of the rust and dirt, the lifting action isn't always 100%.
Working beneath the conveyor bridge can also be a challenge.
The crane needs a bit of clearance overhead and to the right and left. Here, the bridge over us makes it a bit tricky, but there's no way around it.
The only alternative would be to move the truck and crane several times and move the steel plates. But there's no time for that. The SPMT is due here soon. Back at the old drive station site, the SPMT is ready for loading.
We're still missing 2 clamps, right? 2 short and 1 long chain and 2 clamps.
Prior to loading, the 2 SPMTs will have to be brought into position.
The first challenge is positioning the SPMT so that one's directly behind the other in a straight line. If the 2 SPMTs aren't perfectly aligned, steering won't be 100%. Then the wheels will start to drag or rotate on the road. So we need to be perfectly aligned.
Randolf Peters first brings the shorter SPMT into position. It will carry the rear of the drive station. The second, longer SPMT now has to be positioned in front of it, precisely aligned and at the correct distance. It's a complex maneuver. They're aligned. But what about the gap between nose and tail?
We need twice the measuring tape. 950. First axle, last axle. What's it at?
We're at 930, 20 centimeters forward.
One more correction, and it's perfect. Now it's time for the truck-mounted crane. One is 300 tons, the other 400 tons. Andreas Zyron, who works for the assembly company, calls the shots.
Now we take this heavy drive station, which weighs around 70 tons, and lift it carefully from the chassis. Once it's in the air, we swing it over to the module, which will bring it to its new location.
A delicate operation.
Things can always go wrong. If the crane jerks, then these bridge sections could bounce, which we want to avoid. This is precision work.
Time for takeoff. The load has to be distributed as equally as possible between the 2 cranes.
What's the load on your hook?
I've got 30.
Peter, what's your load?
32.
Okay, so we're going to start a slow lift.
The drive station starts to sway. That could be a problem.
Let it calm down first, then we'll continue. I'll go to the front.
Another 30 seconds, and the drive station has stopped swinging.
Okay, start a slow lift. Stop.
The crane has deposited the 50-meter, 70-ton steel frame. But there's a problem.
The load is a bit lower over here, so we're going to have to raise the other side a bit. The power pack needs clearance. We want to be able to lift it if we hit any bumps in the road. It can be lifted independently.
To raise the bed, they'll use anti-skid mats on top of extremely sturdy azobe lumber. Then the crane operators can set the drive station down onto the two SPMTs. It's safely berthed. Now to secure the load. The huge tension chains weigh 50 kilos each. It's a real workout.
There's nothing better. Every muscle group gets a workout.
Next up, the drive station's two crawler tracks will be loaded. They haven't budged in 30 years. The 300-ton crane hauls the front crawler track over the drive station. Its factory specifications give a weight of around 33 tons. It's going on a low-bed truck for transport to the new site, where it will be overhauled. The rear crawler track is listed as weighing just 2 tons more, but it doesn't budge. It seems to be rooted to the spot. The crane is no match for it.
This trawler track is too heavy. The crane's main hoist has a maximum lifting capacity. When that's exceeded, the crane switches off. That's our problem here.
The solution is called reeving. The wire rope travels around an extra pulley, which increases its hoist capacity by 5 tons. The second attempt. The reeving is a success. The crane can lift the crawler chassis. The crane operator can see how heavy the load is. It's 38 tons, 3 tons more than its factory specifications. 2 hours later, the crawler tracks are on their way. Now, the SPMTs can get underway. Randolf Peters avoids the direct route from the unloading site to the paved road. He already got stuck when he tried to come in that way. But the 130-ton transporter is also struggling to find enough traction on this back road.
Everything okay? It started spinning for a moment, but now it's fine.
Five minutes later, they reach solid ground.
All right, we're going to head to the lignite mine with 2 SPMTs. They're synchronously controlled with a single remote control. My colleague Günther is responsible for monitoring the height of the SPMT. This first remote control will handle direction and speed.
Even as a boy, Randolf Peters was fascinated by heavy machinery. As an agricultural trainee, he was 16 when he received his license to drive tractors, cars, and trucks. In 1994, at just 20 years of age, he got his first job in the heavy transport industry. A tarred road like this is child's play for Randolf Peters. Here, he can lay on some speed. At this left turn, though, it gets a bit tight. Navigating the turn without hitting the street light is a precision operation.
What's going on back there?
Plenty of room, keep going.
Just a small nudge.
Okay, we're past the street light.
A half hour later, they reach another obstacle. This conveyor bridge is the real bottleneck on the first section of their route. The SPMT has to pass under it, hugging the center pylon. That's the highest point.
We've laid out some plates so that we can drive underneath the conveyor system. We'll stay next to the road so that we don't have to remove any of this vegetation. There's about 20 centimeters clearance up top. 10 would still be okay.
That's the plan, in any case. The SPMT heads out on its mission. The drive station is halfway through, and then it happens. The railing on the station scrapes up against the conveyor bridge.
Günther, lower the chassis.
With the SPMT tilted to the left, Randolf Peters guides the tail of the transporter to the right to gain clearance.
Straighten up slowly because of the trees.
They pass by the trees with centimeters to spare. All's well for now. After 20 minutes, the transporter has passed beneath the bridge conveyor. The railing on top took a small scrape, nothing more.
I didn't see it because of the sun. Günther wasn't looking there. Normally, there would have been enough room. This time it was tight.
Getting stuck cost them time. Randolf Peters is going to have to pick up speed if he wants to get as far as they'd planned by nightfall. But there's another obstacle. Two groups of power lines cross the street overhead.
We'll wait till the power is switched off at the first lines, drive past it, wait again till the second lines are switched off and drive past that.
The power lines are high enough to allow for plenty of clearance, but they're not taking any chances.
If the power isn't shut off, in the worst-case scenario, a spark could hit the rig. That would be terrible for everyone. That's what we want to prevent.
The first power lines are switched off. Randolf Peters guides the heavily loaded SPMTs safely to the other side. On the way to the second power lines, there's a sharp right turn. This time, they'll take the shoulder. That could easily cause an ordinary flatbed transporter carrying such a heavy load to tip over.
This shows what a floating axle can do. In the middle, the axle is on asphalt there and on gravel there. That's an 8 centimeter height difference, but the axle can handle that.
Now they have to wait. The power is switched back on for the first lines before it's turned off for the second ones. Otherwise, the mine would have no power at all.
Good. Ready?
Now they pass beneath the second set of power lines. They don't have far to go before they reach their destination for the evening, a large intersection near the exit of the abandoned mine. Randolf Peters guides the transporter to the side so that it won't block traffic.
Did you turn on the parking brake?
When you switch off the remote control, it normally activates the brake, but I've already done it.
Yeah.
Today went well. We got around every curve and clearance was good. The power was turned off, we drove underneath. Everything worked, including on the tech side. All good.
Except for the weather.
We lit a candle in church yesterday, but we should have lit 2 of them. It was nice and toasty, but rain would have made it perfect.
In any case, the next stage will be a bit cooler.
We'll park here till 10 p.m. when we can drive on the highway with a police escort. Now it's time for a break.
It's 9 p.m. In an hour, the 50-meter, 130-ton transporter will be allowed on the public road outside the lignite mine. But first, Randolf Peters has to do a bit more prep work, together with his colleague, Günther Lübke, who also goes by Charlie.
We're attaching some spotlights here, some lamps. Then we'll have enough light. That way we can see where the axles are headed.
On the next leg, they'll be getting some support.
We'll have a police escort on the public roadway. And then there's a traffic island where we'll have to remove some traffic signs. Same at the mine entrance.
But theory doesn't always match practice.
Ready, Charlie?
Let's go.
It's a tight squeeze onto the highway, a challenge for Randolf Peters. There's vegetation to the front and back. That should stay unscathed.
How much more back there?
More. Stop.
There's also the risk that the self-propelled modular transporter will get stuck on the unpaved terrain. A fence is also blocking the path, but not for long. The last obstacle here is this traffic sign. It gets a somewhat gentler treatment. At 10 p.m. on the dot, the heavy transporter makes its way to the exit of the abandoned coal mine. At the gate, the Transport Pro switches off the SPMT. He's discussing the plan with the police and the advance commando. Thomas Helmert and his crew will go on reconnaissance and clear a path for them. The flatbed trucks carrying the crawler tracks are the first to head out. Next comes Thomas Helmert and his team. He helps make sure that major transport jobs go off without a hitch. And he loves his job.
Every time out we're dealing with different sizes, a different route, different tasks. I like that variety. It never gets boring.
The first intersection is the exit to the highway. There are a few hazards that need to be dealt with.
They'll have to drive over this traffic island. They're too wide and long to squeeze through. So we'll clear the way for them.
But removing traffic signs isn't enough. Plastic plates need to be laid out on the traffic island. Otherwise, the heavy transporter might damage the paving stones.
The axles on the trailer are all powered. If the transporter has to do any fancy maneuvering, it will churn things up. The next day, the highway authorities will say, "What on earth happened here?"
The team keeps up the pace. The transporter is due to arrive any moment. There are still 2 traffic signs in the way. The first one is easy. The second one is far more stubborn. It's stuck fast in the ground.
The nut is choked, it's rusted tight.
Trying to loosen the nut goes nowhere. Time for the secret weapon, a kind of penetrating oil. They have another go at it. That does the trick. A moment later, the police roll in. They'll be blocking the highway for motorists. To minimize disruption, the police don't head out until the transporter is ready and waiting in the wings. Randolf Peters will try to get the transporter past the intersection in one go, without any forward and reverse maneuvering. That will also help spare the traffic island. At the highway embankment, there's not a lot of room for the 50-meter load.
Charlie, everything okay back there?
Keep going, keep going.
Success. And the next half hour will be smooth sailing. The scouts have arrived at the intersection where the transporter will turn off into the coal mine that's still in operation. The tail of the drive station will have to swing over this grassy strip.
This sign is in the way here. We'll cut it off and then put a cap on it.
This time, they don't use muscle power. Instead, reach for the electric power cutter. It's a job of less than a minute.
We'll sell this for scrap. No, we'll set it aside here, and later we'll put a pipe connector on it. You put a shell inside like this, and then set the other part on top. That'll do the trick.
Soldering it together is another option, but in the end, that might cause extra work for the traffic engineering company.
We don't know how many more times we might need to remove the sign. There might be more transports arriving like this, and then we'd have to get the sign out again. We might eventually have the sign soldered, but I suspect we'll see more deliveries that need this sign removed.
Now it's time for the advance crew to get back on the road. The SPMT with its heavy load is almost here, and another challenge lies ahead for Transport Pro Randolf Peters.
We're leaving the highway, taking a right into the coal mine. It's a tight turn. We've had a traffic sign removed that would have blocked our path. We might still have to remove 1 or 2 boundary posts. Then we'll hang a right and drive in.
The transporter plus its load is 50 meters long and 6 meters wide, 3 times wider than a passenger car. Randolf Peters inches his way forward with care. They're getting pretty close to this right-of-way sign. They can't reverse because their wheels might sink into the unpaved roadside. The steel frame barely squeezes its way past the traffic sign. Now they're running out of room on the right, the inside of the turn. The SPMT can't go further to the right. Our guardrail is in the way. Günther Lübke, who's monitoring the rear, lifts the transporter's chassis as high as it will go. The SPMT's engine just barely skirts the guardrail. It's also a tight squeeze at the mine entrance. Fortunately, the boundary post is flexible and survives the encounter. Now it's just a few hundred meters to their next stopping point. Continuing on these gravel roads would be too dangerous in the dark. At the next intersection, the Transport Pros park the SPMT.
We're done for the evening. Straighten those wheels and then we're done.
Everything went well on this stage. We're hoping it won't be quite so hot tomorrow and we'll finish the job. There's a couple difficulties ahead. Like we'll be driving on gravel roads from here on out. So we'll have to watch for any gradients. There are also some slopes with pretty substantial transverse gradients. And some 90-degree turns where we'll have to be careful and compensate for everything. But I'm sure we'll manage it.
The next morning at the United Schlienhein lignite mine. At 9 a.m. on the dot, Randolf Peters and his colleague Günther Lübke are getting ready to tackle the third and final leg. In 3 hours, the conveyor drive station is due at its new home. This first section is still fairly level, but it still has some surprises in store. This left turn looks harmless. But for a 50-meter long and 6-meter wide colossus, it's a challenge. The turn is a sharp 90-degree right angle.
We're going to have to cut the corner. You want to hit the center of the curve and then turn the wheels near the vertex to make the turn.
So far, so good. There's enough room on the outside of the curve, but exiting the curve, there's vegetation. The steel structure can pass over it. The engine can't. Randolf Peters lets the transporter move onto the loose gravel at the inside of the curve. The swinging axles handle it with ease. He lifts the chassis to make sure the wheels have plenty of clearance. The first bottleneck is behind them. A few hundred meters later comes a stretch that has 3 tricky elements. There's a gradient of 12%. It starts right in the middle of a sharp right turn, and the turn itself slopes inward. A real challenge, even for a pro like Randolf Peters. His colleague, Günther Lübke, adjusts for the inward slope by raising the right side hydraulically. The transporter stays level.
Yeah, that's good, that's good.
The swinging axles compensate for the slope in the road.
There's a cross slope here. We wouldn't manage it without swinging axles. That's one of the advantages of this vehicle.
The outside of the curve is the same, more uneven terrain. The next challenge is the gradient behind the curve. At 130 tons in all, the transporter is eager to barrel its way downhill. Slowing it down takes nearly all the rig's braking power. Every second axle on the transporter is equipped with drum brakes. The other axles, which are hydraulically driven by the 500 horsepower engine, brake when the hydraulic pressure is reduced.
We're driving so slowly that the oil will start to go into reverse when there's not enough load on the axle.
At low loads, the wheels can lose their grip. Then just a bit of hydraulic pressure is enough to spin the wheels backwards. The transporter creeps its way down the slope. Just 300 meters take half an hour.
It's a relief when you get past a stretch like this safely and without any real problems. On a wet road, we wouldn't have managed it. This stretch of gradient really should be paved. A 12 to 14% gradient is pretty intense.
Before they continue, Randolf Peters discusses the rest of the route with Thomas Meissner, an engineer at the Mitteldeutsche Braunkohle Company.
We're going to do another maneuver so that we back up into the construction site with the tail end facing forward. There's a good spot to turn up there. Then we'll drive in reverse down the next slope.
This is the last stop, where the transporter can make a turn before it reaches its destination. There's not a lot of leeway, but the axles can rotate 360 degrees. That does the trick. On this next stretch, the road takes 3 tight turns. It's too narrow for the transporter, so Randolf Peters has to navigate it off the paved road.
You have to be careful that the wheels don't lock. The transition from paved road to gravel is a bit tricky. It drops slightly and the traction changes. We have to compensate for that. Raise the front, Günther.
here comes the tricky spot. The transporter might touch the road, here in the middle, at the engine or the power pack.
Raise the back, raise the power pack.
Steering, accelerating, braking, and adjusting the height. It's a two-person job. Working together, the two heavy transport pros manage to traverse the challenging spot, which proves even trickier than expected.
The road was offset by about half a meter over 50 meters. Quite the adventure. But if you take it nice and slow and you're working with someone who can compensate for that, it's doable.
Two more kilometers to go, and the thermometer has hit 35 degrees Celsius. Heat that would make even a casual stroll uncomfortable. On a job like this, it's brutal.
You have to walk backwards quite a lot. Eventually you get used to it. When I started out, I was quite a bit slower, but now I can walk backward just as fast as forward. I can do about 5 kilometers per hour. You get used to it, and then it's no big deal.
There's one final obstacle, a bridge over a conveyor belt. It's a tight squeeze for the 6-meter wide transporter, and its 50-meter length doesn't help either.
A pretty steep incline on a short stretch of road. Günther, raise the left.
This bridge is rated for a maximum of 60 tons. The loaded transporter weighs 130 tons in all, but because it's so long and the load is distributed across 12 axles, that's not a problem. After 2 days and 1 night on the road, the drive station finally reaches its destination. A perfectly planned job, all part of a day's work, but still a relief.
You're always happy when you reach the destination without any difficulty or damage. Sure, it's a relief.
The heat was hard on man and machine. We're happy that we've come to a safe landing, and we're planning to go swimming this afternoon.
Before they can call it a day, the drive station still needs to be lifted off the transporter and onto the crawler tracks. They've already been put into position.
Right, here you see the interface of the drive station. This is where the big chassis will be mounted, so they'll be welded back on. These here are the interfaces. They have to fit down to the millimeter. This is its counterpart on the running gear. This is where it will be mounted, which is a perfect fit. Then it'll be welded together.
The huge truck-mounted cranes, which have a maximum lifting capacity of 300 and 400 tons, get to work. They lift the drive station off the transport modules and set them down on the crawler tracks. Half an hour later, the assembly crew can also get to work. Transport pro Randolf Peters is doing mop-up. He hauls the heavy tension chains and accessories into the container. The transporter gets shifted into base position. Now, he's finally done for the day.
It all went well, but when you finish one job, you know the next one's waiting in the wings. Then the whole thing starts all over again.